All right, so today we're going to talk about the skeletal and the muscular systems. Again, two different systems that work hand in hand to perform similar functions in some way. So your skeleton, if you will, supports your body, gives structure. It provides movement. It really should say probably assists with movement. Your skeleton itself doesn't move. It's really the muscular system that moves, but it assists with that movement. It stores minerals like calcium. So there are reactions in your body that need calcium, but it's stored in your bones. Not noted here, but it does protect your organs. So, for instance, the rib cage protects organs. The skull protects your brain, obviously. So it does obviously a great job protecting your organs. And it provides a location in which new red blood cells are made. So red blood cells um, are used, and eventually they do become kind of inefficient, and they're discarded. A little side note: they're often discarded in urination and feces. So it's a bone marrow itself in the bone that makes a new supply of red blood cells. And for an adult, is made of 206 bones. And that changes over time. A baby, if you will, their skeleton isn't quite mature, doesn't have that number, but when they reach at an early age a full skeleton, if you will, they will have 206 bones, just like you and I. So the bones themselves, from any of you 90s hip hop fans out there, they are made of cells. All right? They are living tissue, but they are special in that they surround themselves in calcium. All right, but there are living cells inside bone, and they also contain bone marrow. All right, so the bone marrow is the soft, dark red, spongy material. So some people, when they eat chicken bones, they like to, or not the bones themselves, but they like to crack the bone open and suck out the bone marrow. I'm not a particular fan myself, but in bones, bone marrow exists, and again, this is where the red blood cells are made. All right, so the skeleton is not just made of bone; it's also made of cartilage, which is also a tissue, but it's a softer, spongier material, encasing themselves in more of a spongier protein. So again, being living cells, but instead of surrounding themselves in very durable cartilage, it's much more flexible uh, cartilage. So, for instance, you have cartilage in your nose. That's why you can grab your nose and wiggle it a little. And obviously, your ears are made of cartilage. And believe it or not, your ribs actually have cartilage. As you can see, this little guy down here. There's some ribs and there's some cartilage in there that actually keeps the rib cage kind of intact, and likewise does allow it some flexibility. But in particular, there's a lot of cartilage in your joints. So, in particular, like your knee, for instance. And this prevents bone from rubbing on bone. It's pretty painful, from what I understand. Joints themselves are where any bones will meet. So some examples that exist would be like the ball and socket joint of the shoulder, the hinge joint of like the elbow or even like the knee, the pivot joint, which is kind of like also part of your elbow, where the radius and ulna of your forearm rotate around each other, and then more complex joints that exist within like the hand, for instance, which are just basically mixtures of these others. Not included are immovable joints. So some bones are fused together, but that is technically a joint because it's where two bones are meeting. All right, but the role cartilage plays there is that it provides some kind of cushioning and even some lubrication for the movement of those joints. And again, your knees in particular, there's a lot of pressure you put on your knees, and that cartilage plays a very important role in providing for that cushioning. Now, the bones themselves are held together; they're not locked in place except for those immovable joints. But the ones that move, they're not snapped together like Lego pieces, but they're held together by ligaments. Ligaments are these fibers that radiate from one bone to the next and to some degree connect them. If you've ever sprained rather, like an ankle or something like that, you stretch your ligaments, and it's painful. It does heal, but it's also one of those injuries that kind of stays with you throughout your life. I sprained my ankle when I was a senior in high school, and those few moments that I'm active now, sometimes I feel it if I'm just doing whatever, stepping on my ankle. Don't confuse ligaments with tendons, because what tendons do is they connect the skeletal muscle, which is the muscle you're more familiar with, to your bones. So here's a picture of the knee. So there's ligaments that exist here that are connecting like the bones of the upper leg to the lower leg, but there's also tendons in here that connect the muscle to the bone, and those are important. The tendons are, because when the muscle pulls, it pulls on the bone, and when it pulls on the bone, it causes the bone to move the appropriate direction. So let's talk more about the movement. So in muscle, in particular skeletal muscle, there's these proteins called myosin and actin. They're found in all cells in different ways and shapes and forms, but the myosin and the actin are these fibers that kind of cross from one muscle cell to the next, and they work interchangeably to kind of connect the cells. And what they do is, if they experience a surge in energy, for instance, like from the nervous system, the proteins will actually change shape, and when they change shape, it causes the muscle tissue to move and to constrict. So in our little analogy here, you have, let's say, two different muscle cells. All right. So this would be a muscle cell, as this would be over here. Notice the nucleus. All right, and then the fibers that are radiating from one to the other is the myosin and the actin. All right, what happens is impulses from the nervous system that are targeting those particular muscle cells will hit the myosin and the actin, and it will cause them to kind of contort and constrict. And if that's done over the millions and billions of cells in a muscle, the entire muscle will constrict. And when the muscle constricts, it pulls the bones with it. That's basically what voluntary movement is. All right, so what happens is the muscles flex and pull the attached bones. They pull on the tendons, which pull on the bones. So here's a little animated GIF of kind of the muscles you would see with walking, moving your leg back and forth. So you can see as you bring the leg back, like your glute muscle here is very active, twisting and shortening. Your hamstrings become very not swollen, but they constrict and they flex. But as you move the leg forward, sometimes other muscles like your quad would constrict and pull the muscle forward as you move that leg forward as well. So basically, that's what walking is the firing of muscles back and forth to move your leg back and then move it forward, all of which is controlled ultimately by your nervous system. All right, and there's again, so muscles don't push. I know we push, all right, but it's actually muscles that constrict. That's all they do, is they relax and then they constrict. So there's another type of muscle. There's two more technically, but there's the other one is called smooth muscle, and this is muscle you have no control over. All right, but that being the case, it's not particularly strong, but it's found in the organs of the autonomic nervous system. So, for instance, the small intestine is made of smooth muscle, large intestine, even the stomach, you name it. And you don't have to think about pushing food slowly through the small intestine. All right, it does that on its own, but it's weaker muscle, but you don't have to think about it, and it's controlled by the brain ultimately, or even your blood vessels, believe it or not, are types of muscle that they constrict and relax, changing the blood flow in your body. And your eyes, so your eyes react to changes in light and such, and they do that with muscle. You don't have to consciously adjust your eyes. It kind of happens automatically, but it's muscles, smooth muscle in your eye that does that. All right, last but not least, there's cardiac muscle, and this is found only in your heart. All right, makes sense. It's similar to smooth muscle in that it is controlled involuntarily, but it's similar to skeletal muscle in that it is on the stronger side. Your heart's a very strong muscle. It has to pump blood to pretty much every reach of your body. So it has those similarities there. Again, not under your control. All right, so this happens automatically, but it is a strong muscle in its own right. So it's kind of a combination of the two, hence the fact they consider its own muscle in itself.